I never imagined that my step-grandson would do this. At first, everything seemed perfect. My life had settled into a comfortable routine. I was married to Richard, a wonderful man who had children and grandchildren from his previous marriages. I didn't mind that I was the second wife. In fact, I loved the life we built together. My relationship with Richard's children was good, but I had always struggled with a feeling of distance. However, I adored my step-grandson, Caleb. He was just 25, bright, charming, and I saw him like the son I never had. Caleb had always been close to me. I often took him out to lunch or invited him over for quiet evenings. We would talk about his studies, his future plans, and his interests. I felt a special connection with him. He had a warmth that made him easy to talk to, and I considered him part of my own family, even though the blood didn't connect us. Over the years, I had been there for him through many ups and downs, offering advice, encouragement, and emotional support. Richard was a busy man, involved in his career, and often out of town for work. Caleb, being closer to my age than his parents, sometimes confided in me more than he did in his own parents. I felt privileged that he trusted me enough to open up. He wasn't perfect. He had his own struggles, particularly with his father's expectations. But I could always see the good in him, the young man beneath the insecurities and the surface. However, something changed in recent months. Caleb started pulling away. At first, I thought it was just the usual growing pains of a young adult trying to find his way in the world. But as the weeks passed, I began to notice odd behavior. He would come over less frequently, and when he did, he seemed distracted. I couldn't help but feel a shift, though I didn't know what it meant. It was subtle, a change in his tone, a reluctance to spend time together. But when I tried to talk to him about it, he would brush it off, insisting everything was fine. I wasn't sure what was going on, but I wasn't about to push him. After all, he was a grown man, and I didn't want to pry too much into his personal life. It wasn't until one evening, after a family dinner, that I began to sense something truly unsettling. Richard and I had just finished eating, and Caleb had hung around a bit longer than usual, chatting briefly with Richard before making an excuse to leave. I wasn't sure why, but the air felt tense. It wasn't like Caleb to rush off without saying goodbye, and I was left with a nagging feeling that I couldn't shake. I couldn't explain it, but something about that moment unsettled me deeply. Later that night, as I was sitting in the living room, thinking about everything that had been happening recently, I started reflecting on Caleb's odd behavior. I thought back to the last few times we'd spent together, his avoidance, the strange silences. My gut told me something wasn't right, but I had no proof. I wondered if perhaps I was overthinking it, if I was just being paranoid. But then again, I had seen how a small change in someone's behavior could hint at something much bigger. I couldn't ignore the feeling that Caleb was hiding something. It wasn't just the distance, it was the secrecy. And that made my stomach turn. The family I had known, the family I had worked so hard to create, suddenly felt like it was teetering on the edge of something I didn't understand. I knew I had to get to the bottom of it. The more I thought about it, the more I felt that I couldn't just let things slide. I had to trust my instincts, even if they were telling me something I wasn't ready to hear. But I never could have anticipated the truth that was waiting just beneath the surface. The truth that would shatter everything I thought I knew about my family, my relationships, and even my own heart. The following week, I couldn't shake the feeling of unease. Caleb's behavior had grown even more erratic. He would avoid eye contact, speak in short, clipped sentences, and always seemed to have somewhere else to be. Something was off, and I knew I had to address it. I couldn't just ignore the tension building between us. The more I thought about it, the more I realized I had to confront him directly, no matter how uncomfortable it might make both of us. One evening, I found Caleb sitting alone in the kitchen. He was fiddling with his phone, clearly lost in thought. I took a deep breath and decided that this was the moment I had to face whatever was going on. I sat down across from him, my hands shaking slightly, unsure of how to start. But before I could say anything, he glanced up, startled as if he hadn't expected me to approach him. I could see that he was nervous, and that made me even more certain that something wasn't right. "Caleb, we need to talk," I said, my voice steady but firm. He nodded but didn't say anything. His silence made the air feel thick, like we were both waiting for the other to speak first. "What's going on?" I asked, trying to keep my voice calm, even though my heart was racing. "You've been acting distant lately. I'm worried about you." "Is something wrong?" For a moment, he didn't respond. He just stared at the table, his fingers tapping anxiously on the edge. I could feel his unease radiating off of him. I waited, watching him struggle to find the words. His reluctance only added to the growing suspicion in my chest. "I'm fine," he muttered, avoiding my gaze. "Nothing's wrong. I'm just busy." I didn't buy it. The way he said it, the quickness with which he dismissed my concern, it didn't feel genuine. I leaned in slightly, keeping my tone soft but insistent. "Caleb, I've known you for years. I know when something's off. You don't have to hide anything from me. I'm here for you." He shifted uncomfortably in his seat, clearly conflicted. There was a long pause before he finally spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know how to explain it," he said. "Things have been complicated. I've been trying to figure them out." I waited for him to continue, my pulse quickening. Whatever it was, I knew it wasn't going to be good. Caleb was usually an open book with me. To hear him speak in such vague terms only heightened my anxiety. "What do you mean by complicated?" I pressed. "If you're struggling, I want to help. You don't have to carry this on your own." He hesitated again, his fingers now gripping the edge of the counter. His eyes flickered up to meet mine, but they quickly darted away again. I could see the conflict in him, but I couldn't make sense of it. Finally, he let out a deep sigh, as if the weight of the conversation was starting to break through. "I've been seeing someone," he said, his voice trembling slightly. I don't know how to say this, but it's someone close to the family." My heart dropped, and the room felt like it was spinning. I could barely process the words he had just said. "What do you mean?" I asked, my voice shaking now. He closed his eyes for a moment, clearly struggling with guilt. "It's your daughter-in-law. I know it's wrong, but we've been seeing each other for a while now." I felt the blood drain from my face. My mind was reeling, trying to make sense of the information he had just dropped on me. Caleb and my daughter-in-law? How could this be happening? How could they betray me like this? The shock was overwhelming, and I couldn't even find the words to respond immediately. Caleb continued, his voice almost pleading. "I never meant for it to happen. I didn't want to hurt anyone. It just happened, and I didn't know how to process what Caleb had just confessed." My mind raced with 1,000 thoughts, all jumbled together, none of them making sense. How had we gotten to this point? Caleb, my step-grandson, the young man I had watched grow up, had betrayed me in the most unforgivable way. And then there was my daughter-in-law, the woman I had always treated like my own daughter. How could she do this to me? To Richard? To our family? The more I thought about it, the more the reality of the situation sank in, like a crushing weight pressing down on my chest. I sat there, trying to wrap my mind around it all. The silence between us felt deafening. Caleb's eyes were pleading for understanding, but I couldn't bring myself to offer him any. How could I? This wasn't a small mistake. This was a betrayal that shattered everything I had believed about my family, my relationships. Why? I finally managed to choke out, my voice barely above a whisper. Caleb looked at me, his face full of guilt and remorse. But it wasn't enough. I needed more than regret. I needed answers. "How could you do this? How could you betray me like this? You know what this would do to the family, to Richard, to everyone." He opened his mouth as if to speak, but nothing came out at first. His shame was so palpable that it felt like the room itself was suffocating. Finally, he spoke, his voice low and filled with sorrow. "I never meant for it to happen," he said. "It wasn't supposed to be like this. I swear I didn't plan it. But it just happened." I shook my head in disbelief, my mind still struggling to make sense of his words. "Just happened," I repeated, my voice trembling. "How can something like this just happen? You're telling me that you—" I stopped, unable to continue. The words stuck in my throat. This wasn't something I could easily talk about, let alone comprehend. Caleb ran a hand through his hair in frustration, clearly aware of the depth of the mess he had created. "I know how it sounds, but I don't know how to explain it. We both got caught up in it. It wasn't like we planned it from the start, but things just went too far. Too far. I echoed, my heart pounding in my chest. You think that's all this is? You think this is just a mistake? You've destroyed everything. How am I supposed to look at you the same way again after this? How am I supposed to trust you? The anger was rising now, and I couldn't hold it back any longer. This wasn't just about me anymore. It was about our entire family, the trust that had been built over years, and the irrevocable damage that had now been done. I didn't want this to happen, but I couldn't help myself, Caleb continued, his voice breaking. I was confused. I felt neglected, and I don't know, I guess it felt like the only thing that made me feel something real. I didn't think about the consequences. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. But those words didn't help. Sorry wasn't going to fix this. Sorry wasn't going to take away the betrayal that cut deeper than I ever thought possible. I had given so much of myself to this family, had worked so hard to be a part of it, and now it felt like all of that had been shattered in an instant. What about Richard? I asked, my voice low, almost a whisper. The question hung in the air, heavy and unspoken for a long moment. I needed to know. I needed to understand how far this had gone, and how deep this betrayal truly ran. Caleb swallowed hard before answering. I haven't told him. I don't think I could. He'd never understand. I don't even understand it myself. He looked at me with pleading eyes. Please don't tell him. I can't bear the thought of losing everything. I know what I've done is terrible, but I don't know how to fix it. I stood up, pacing across the room. My heart was in turmoil. I wanted to scream at him, to make him understand the depth of what he had done, but I couldn't find the words. The pain was too raw, too deep. I loved Caleb, or at least I thought I did. But this was a different side of him, a side I had never seen, and it made my stomach turn. I don't know what to do, I said, more to myself than to Caleb. I don't know how to fix this. I don't even know how to look at you anymore. I thought I could trust you. My voice cracked with the weight of the emotion flooding through me. But now, everything feels broken. Caleb's face crumpled, the remorse written all over him. I know. I don't expect you to forgive me. I don't expect anything from you. I needed to tell you. I couldn't keep lying to you. I couldn't even look at him. The betrayal felt so much bigger than just the affair. It was the breach of trust, the feeling of being so utterly blindsided, the realization that this family, my family, had been built on fragile ground all along. I was no longer sure who to trust, and that feeling of uncertainty gnawed at me. I left him sitting there, my heart heavy with grief and anger. As I walked away, all I could think about was how to salvage the pieces of my life that had been torn apart. How could I go back to the way things were? How could I forgive what had been done, if forgiveness was even possible? The truth was, I didn't know. I didn't know how to move forward from here.